Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to talk about part 2 of our table, countertop, and cabinet build. And today we are going to talk about the countertops.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. So we're going to finish up a little bit more about this table build before we get down to the countertops. We have to do the finishing yet, and we wanted to show you a little bit more about what we did with the bottom, the legs of the table itself. So these pieces are just a couple we had left over, and we cut these up into all those pieces that you did see in the last video. But before we did that, we filled them with epoxy, and I'm going to have a link to the description of the epoxy that we used. Now we chose to do a red epoxy, kind of offset the roof a little bit. I thought it would look really nice in there. So that's what you're going to see is just a little bit of epoxy next. And then we'll show you the final assembly and the finishing that we used. And Rubio Monocoat is fantastic. So stay tuned for that. It's probably important to note here that every time we poured into these little holes, we did clean it out first. We dug out the bits, blew it all out really good. Some people say to pre-coat it. You know, I guess it depends on what you're doing. There's a ton of videos on YouTube for pouring epoxy. So this is, you know, nothing new for maybe many of you have already researched it, but you know, you put it in there, wait a little bit. I hit it with a heat gun and all the bubbles come to the surface, just kind of waving it, never hold it right on there, just wave it back and forth. You could use a little stir stick, make designs. There's all kinds of creativity here. But in short, we just poured a little bit, let it mound up a little bit, and then sanded it off later. We did have to do a couple applications in some spots, but right there you'll see there's this aluminum tape. It's for taping seams for like that fiberglass stuff on your roof. That works super good. So if you're looking for a tape, I've had really good luck with that. So give it a shot.
Just did a quick epoxy pour. This one clearly needs more. Got this other pillar. It's looking pretty good. And then the last bit is the table. Looks like I bled all over, but it's not. A bunch of spots here and there, pits. We'll need to hit it with another coat, but first, I'm gonna let it sit for a bit and soak in. Especially that one.
So once all this dried, I ran it through my planer to get all the excess epoxy off. It is very, very hard to sand down. So that might be a nice little tip for you. And then afterward, you know, you can hit it with your regular 120 or whatever, you know. Just make sure you go to a really high grit, otherwise you're gonna see sand marks in it. At this point in our build, we were ready to do the mortise and tenor joints for the two pillars that would connect the table base. Now, for this, I went to my friend Chris over at Third Coast Craftsman. He's very good at this. I would consider him a master woodworker. If you ask him, probably he wouldn't say that, but he's very, very, very good. So what we did here is we're using the table saw to make precise cuts all the way around. Then this way, after those cuts are made, we're going to go over to the bandsaw and cut them out to do the actual tenors. And then he has a special tool for cutting mortise holes. Saves a ton of time so you don't have to chisel them. You know, first drill, then chisel. So those will be later on in the video. But for this piece right here, all we're doing is making these cuts before we go on the bandsaw. So thanks a lot, Chris. This was super helpful, and it was great to spend time with you. It was awesome.
This way. Wow. Much better. I feel like I need redemption for this. Yeah, this is where I need
So one thing that I learned from Chris is when you're doing these mortise and tenor setups, you need to mark them because each one has a certain place where it's going to go. So where I'm marking right now is the actual mortise hole. Now the tenor pieces, you stand them all up where you want them to be, figure out which side is, you want out, which is pretty, etc., etc., and then you mark them. Now the way I mark these was where this one's going, for example, this was A1. The one next to it would be A2, and on the other side it'd be B1, B2. You can choose whatever you like. Just make sure you mark them. Like that end piece of marking has to go in that particular tenor or mortise hole. And then, this particular tenor goes in the other tenor hole. You get the idea. So, very important step. So now that we've figured out where we're going to put these pieces, the next step is to start marking out where the mortise holes are going to be. Now the two pieces you see right there are going to actually mount on the underside of the table. We're going to repeat this process for the bottom part of the legs as well. But what we're doing here is figuring out how far apart these are going to be, and then we're marking them. Now once we get the distance for the width of these set up, then we're going to start marking out where the mortise holes are going to go. Just like what we're doing in this picture here. We want to get both sides, stand them up, and kind of get a general idea of the cut area. Now, after this part is done, there's a lot of marking, as you can see. We're kind of tagging this and getting it done. To make the marks, we're going to use a gauge tool. Now, I'm going to put a link to this in the description. First time I've used this, but what a level of precision. This one, you basically just drag it across after you adjust it, and it makes the marks right where that mortise hole is going to go. You can faintly see them in the picture here. And once you're done, then you could fill in those holes with a pencil to make them stand out a little bit. Then you have an exact cut precisely where it's going to be. So that's our next step. So after we get this done, we're going to start moving forward and go into the mortise tool. But there's one more small step I'll add. Now the last piece is to mark the actual perpendicular lines that you're going to have. Obviously the marking gauge can't do that. So it's just a marking knife, just like that, just like a pretty stout razor. So you set it up, you carefully go and connect the lines that you just made, the little gouge marks, and then use the pencil to darken them up. So when you go to the mortise machine, it's much easier. This level of precision is pretty amazing, and it's pretty satisfying to work with as well. Not the kind of caliber of work I normally do, but I think I'm going to start stepping my game up and doing these types of things. So it was an excellent experience. So the last part of this process is this mortise hole tool. It's like a drill press, actually. It's got a really long handle for leverage, and you put the part in there. You basically adjust the depth with that. There's little crank handles to move it left and right and forward and backwards. And you just keep going like I'm showing you. Super easy. It's very, very, very sharp. There's a drill bit inside of a steel casing basically that's got razor sharp edges. So when you push down, it kind of does the chiseling and the drilling all at the same time. Excellent tool. It'd be really nice to have one day if I start doing this more and more. But I think my next time I do this, I'm going to try it with the old drill and chisel just to see if I can do that. But anyway, this is it. All right, now we're at the point where we're going to get these legs cut. I have an older bandsaw I'm going to use to get these done. Probably going to be a little wavy, but I'll have to sand it out. Not a big deal. But what I plan to do is, this is the top here. I'm going to go up 2 inches. Then I'm going to go in 7 inches. And we're going to draw a line. Cut this off. Do the same for the other side. And then we're going to go in 4 inches. And then we're going to go up on an angle perpendicular to this. So I'll measure the distance here to make sure it's consistent all the way across. And then we're going to cut out this middle section. So I'll go ahead and do that. So this process is something I did for the other side, and I also did it for the 2 pieces that go directly under the table and mount to it. The caution that I had is when I made these marks and then eventually the cuts, is I wanted to make sure I was far enough away from where we put the mortise holes, and just to make sure everything was strong. But I also was thinking about when we sit at the table, we don't want to hit our knees. So that's where a lot of these measurements came from in the cuts. It ended up working out really, really well. But those, if you do this kind of thing, just think about those things, because it's usually something that's an afterthought, and you'll find out when you bang your knee on it. So anyhow, enjoy the rest.
Well, not everything goes to plan all the time. I don't know if you could see that in here, but there's a big bulge. So this is convex and this is concave. What are we gonna do about that? Oh, foo, and this one is even more lovely. But that's okay. These mistakes are opportunities to make something even cooler. So I'm gonna get out the palm sander here and see what I can do. Either way, it's gonna turn out fine, not a big deal. So stay tuned with me. I have no idea what this is gonna do, but it's gonna look pretty good when we're done. I'll make sure of it. Well, all in all, it looks pretty good. I ended up having to freehand cut those on the table saw. And then just sanded it with 120, rounded the edges a little bit, and then 220. Mortise and tender joints are all ready to go. And Heather's over here finishing up the bottom pieces. Putting a nice 120 rounded edge on it. And then the plan is to go ahead and put the support pillars in sideways there, glue them, and then I'm going to brad nail them from the inside to hold them in place. And then we're going to swing back over here, put them in here, blow everything off really good, wipe it down, and throw some Rubio on it. I've been waiting for this for a long time. So for the Rubio, it's just a little tiny bit. You take the Rubio Monocoat, and you take the Activator, and it's a 3-to-1 mix. So 3 parts Rubio Monocoat to 1 part Accelerator. And then whenever I go to Chinese restaurants, I do challenge myself to try and use the chopsticks, but they make really good stir sticks if you don't use them. So there you go. So we'll stir this up good. We're gonna put a tiny bit on, just a little bit, and then we're gonna spread it around. I know I'm blocking your view. Let's get you over here. Oh, you can see all the action. You get these little white scrubbies and you just scrub it in really good. Now for some of these side pieces, what they say to do is once you get it all scrubbed in with these, then you get one of these, what are these called? Not terry cloths, the sticky.
Oh, microfiber.
Microfiber towels. And you wipe off the excess, and then you could do that up here and wipe it into the other stuff.
So the remainder of this table, you know, we basically just did this for quite a while. I'll speed it up a little bit. There's just a lot of nooks and crannies, and this stuff is a little difficult to get into those spots. But again, as mentioned, you know, you want to rub it in really good. It gets into the grain. And then after a little bit, maybe 15 minutes or so, it'll start to get a little sticky. So you want to get it in really good, make sure there's no buildup and so on and so forth. Wipe it all off really good. And it soaks in nice, you know, and then you let it sit for 24 hours. You can put another coat on, which I did, even though Rubio doesn't necessarily recommend it. But some of the other videos I watched, they did put a second coat on, and it did improve it a little bit. So we'll flip through some of this, and then you can see us do the tabletop. And this is the finished product. Very happy with the way it turned out. Now we did put another coat on off camera after 24 hours just to make sure, did the whole thing again, but very happy. And we also put some feet on the bottom of it. They have these little felt pads, as you can see here. I'll put a link to it in the description. They're really, really nice. So that way we don't scratch up our floor. But this is it. Table's done. Now to move on to the countertops. Now, for the most part, the table is finished, and we wanted to touch base a little bit on what we did for the countertops. I'm going to save a lot of video here because it's the exact same process, except these, you know, they're just a little bit longer. We put the biscuits in there, and we also Kreg jigged it to hold them together a little bit better. Now, Clamping it, everything is the exact same thing. So one of the differences is these countertops, we have one piece is going to be 6 foot long on the back side and the other one's going to be 4 foot long. And we plan to cut a 45-degree angle to make an L shaped. And this, of course, will sit on top of the cabinets we're going to build that we'll show a little bit later in the video. But it's a pretty straightforward process. You know, all that glue that came off you just saw, once it's done, we just scrape it off, wipe it, sand it, etc., etc. So this part we'll kind of skip through a little more quickly. The next piece, though, just to make sure these don't buckle, and something I had to do was create braces. And I just basically bought some C-channel steel. Now we're going to see that in this next clip. Now for the countertops, as I just mentioned, for rigidity, I'm putting in this C-channel. And the placement for this, basically for the longer one, I put 4 pieces in. I set them in about 4 inches in from the side and I think 2 inches from either end. Drilled these holes so they're slightly bigger than the screws that we're putting in the bottom of the countertop. Those little screws are those brass inserts that I showed you earlier with the table. Did the exact same thing, you know, but in this case I used the shorter stainless button head bolts that I ordered off Amazon. Those are perfect for this. So after we go through this layout, we're going to get into the part where we router it out. So these things are basically countersunk in for the most part. That's the next piece you're going to see.
All right, we've got them all marked out. And there. Now we're going to go ahead and get the router set up and get these grooves cut out. So on these 3 here, I can get away with my little 2 foot level, but this guy, I got to use the 4 foot. So what I've done basically, just clamped it down on each side, as you can see there. And I set the router up. And underneath here, you can probably see that it just overlaps the line just a smidge. It's probably hard to see, but I've got this up against it. And then that's how I did it. So now the next step is just turning the router on and running it past. Now one thing I realized I had to do, I had to go a little past these marks right here, just a little bit past, just to give it a little bit of wiggle room in there, because this will expand this way. So not the length, of course. So that's our next step. We're going to go ahead and do that. All right, so we have all these routered out, ready to go. This is sort of what they're going to look like when they sit in there, this piece here. So I'll need to mark these holes. I'm just basically going to use the drill and just turn it a little bit, hold it in place after I kind of center it. These again are a little bigger than the actual bolts themselves. So once I get that started, I'll drill it to depth, put the pieces in, and we'll show you what that looks like finished up. But here is the finished pieces. Not too bad, you know, with the equipment I used and had, I'm pretty happy with it. So everything's going to fit in there nicely. Just a little tip with these inserts when you put them in, they give you an Allen wrench, but using a ratchet is way easier with an Allen wrench fitting. So as you can see, it goes in really nice, and the Allen wrench will crush your hand. So work smarter. Get yourself a wrench. So it is a mess in here, but I will say I'm super pumped. This is the moment I've been waiting for, at least for these countertops. Everything is sanded all the way up to 320 grit. Water popped it, you know, in between sand coats. You just fluff it with a little water. It's ready to go. It's all wiped off. It's ready. I've mixed the Rubio Monocoat. First time, I did the underside already. I'm really happy with it.
So just like you saw before on the table, same exact process. And this goes a long way. I can't emphasize that enough. We put a little bit in a cup, and you'll see it here in a second. That did everything for both sides of these countertops. So, I mean, it's just a little bit in that little cup. One thing I do want to bring up, though, is as I mentioned, I sanded it up to 320. You don't need to do that. I believe Rubio says you only need to go up to like 150 or something along those lines. But it's important to water pop in between. And if you haven't done that before, you know, you'd sand it with 80 grit and wipe it off. And then you'd spray it with a water bottle and spray it really good, you know, not to the point where it's pooling, but so it's soaked in really good, and then let that air dry and then sand again with the next grit. Let's say you go to 120, something like that. But the water popping really helps to bring the grains out and stand everything up. Then when you knock it down, it's just a much better way. You can do a lot of research on that if you like, but that's the best way to do this. So another thing I'd like to mention about why we chose Rubio is, one, repairability. So if you get a scuff on this or something happens to it, you can sand that little spot and mix up some Rubio and put a little bit more on it and it'll blend perfectly. Whereas if you use something like polyurethane, you have to sand the whole thing and then reapply. So, and it smells really nice. Now, this is the finish. You know, we did put a second coat on just like the table, but overall, this turned out really good too. It's my first time using this product and I couldn't be happier. So if you choose to use this, I hope you have just as good results. I'm sure you will. Just be sure to let it dry, and that's it. And we're finally on to building the cabinets. We were really excited because this is the last step, and then we could bring these up to the cabin. Same process as we did with the table. We milled the boards, then we planed them, straight edged them, and glued them up. You do need quite a bit of room for this kind of stuff. I had to use the floor. And clamps. Those are about all the clamps that I have. So right after glue up, now we can start thinking about assembly. These pieces are glued up and ready. These are going to be the base for each cabinet. And then the pieces back there are going to be for the sides of each of the cabinets, along with this little pile right here. The next step after this right here is getting all the edges straight. When we glued them, some were a little longer than others, which is fine. So getting these squared up is the next step. Then we start to cut the rabbets to get everything assembled. All right, so we got them all squared up. That wasn't too bad. Got them all cut to length. Just cut the width on the table saw and chopped off the length. It was too big for my table saw, so I had to do it with a circular saw. And then I just set up a dado blade on my table saw and cut this 1/4 inch wide groove here, this little rabbet, so I can go ahead and use it for the bottom shelves, well, the base actually of the cabinets. Now what I need to do is I need to cut out the kick panels, these little squares. So I went up about 3.5 inches. I'm gonna go the same thereabouts and just knock off a little chunk here and a little chunk here. So to figure it out, you just hold it up. Here's the front, this will be the outside. So I'll just do one of those deals. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those cut out, probably use a jigsaw for that and a speed square. Go ahead and do that for these 3 too. And then I cut up a bunch of these Hackberry 2x4-ish boards. I'm gonna run these through the planer, get them tidied up, and then straighten them up on the table saw. These are actually gonna be the supports inside. So once I get the shelf put in, I'll probably have these running here, and then 2 on the top to attach to the countertops. And then after that, we're gonna start working on the face panels for the actual cabinets themselves. So I'm super excited. We're very, very close. So stay tuned for the rest. See you soon. All right, so the cabinet's together. It fits really good. The seams are good. A few clamps here and there. And what I did is just use the brad nailer and put some nails in here. I had to hit it down. It didn't want to seat, but a couple blows from the hammer, got her done. So then I put the braces in, got some up top there, and then 2 in the back. Those will again fasten to the wall, and those will fasten to the countertops, which I'll need to groove out for the supports. I'll just router out some once I get them all together. All right, so as you can see, the cabinets are done. They're laid on their backs for now because I want to put the faces on them. So what I've done here is everything is cut to 2 inches, except this one is 4 inches. It's going to be in the middle of this one. I'm going to measure out the pieces in here, cut them all to length, dry fit them, make sure they work good. And then the next step, I'm going to try to put in some pocket screws right in here and see if that'll hold them together good. Glued, and then I'll use the brad nailer to get them back together. So, and then after that, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the covers for the kick plates and a support piece in the back. And then these guys are pretty much ready to have the drawers made and the doors and all that other fun stuff, which I'll probably hold off. I'm going to take them up to the cabin just because we need something and I have a lot of other things to do, but let's see how this turns out. So stay tuned for the next piece. All right, so here's a quick shot of how I'm doing the glue up, and looks like the pocket screws with the Kreg jig worked out perfect. They don't poke through. So I did a light clamp here, clamped them together to hold them, felt down here to make sure that the edges were nice and flush, and screwed them in with a little tiny bit of glue on the ends. So this is one piece down. Let's get on to the rest. So while that cabinet face was drying, I decided to go ahead and put on the kick plate on both of the cabinets. This is just the larger one that we put on. Once this was finished up, it was easy for me to go ahead and take the face that I previously did and put it on. it looked really good. As you can see here, I'm pretty happy with the overall end product. So just one thing I learned, the horizontal lines are the rails and the vertical ones, the vertical boards, are considered the stiles. It's a term that a lot of folks that build cabinets used. So I did learn quite a bit about this, and attaching it, I just used Kreg jig screws, just like the other. Worked really, really well. Glued it and clamped it, of course. So after I was able to put all the faces on, Kreg jigged them, and they're all good to go, I needed to drill these holes for our adjustable shelves. And I was thinking about it and decided, hey, I'm gonna buy the Kreg jig tool. And I did. I like Kreg jig products. They're pretty darn nice, I gotta say. Really easy to use. Clamped it on. I even held it on a couple of them. But it was easy as just setting this T-square up here, or this little square, screw them in, and it was good to go. All the adjustments are there so you get the right depth, and they even give you some pins. I'm gonna need more, but it worked out very, very well. The next step after this was just throwing some finish on it. We did polyurethane, 2 coats, sanded in between, and she was ready to go. And as you can see here, this is the final product as it sits in the cabin. Very, very happy with it. So yeah, would do it again. And here's a quick shot of the cabin with our table, countertops, and cabinets all in there. You'll notice I didn't put in the face or the cabinet doors or any of the drawers yet. We needed to get it up there because everything is all over the place. We're working on it. Our next video, which is something we're working on as I speak, is we're making the tongue and groove boards that'll end up being our wall coverings. We're super, super excited about that. And it just continues on with this build, which has been so much fun. What a great learning experience. And I want to thank everybody for watching, especially this far. And we saved a little blooper at the very end, so you can enjoy that if you're still here. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to H&N Creations. Today's episode, we are going to show you how we built the cabin for the table.
Yeah, and we wrapped some pixies around it. Pickles. Take 4.